I wanted to give you a great report. Anthony did a fantastic job, both with our children and with our adults, explaining our service project this year. It's really important. I think that sometimes we don't do as good a job letting everyone know that, at least here, I don't know how other churches do it, that when we encourage the kids to bring an offering, it's not that same old thing that churches just need money and everybody's got to bring an offering. We really have a goal in mind with our kids, and certainly that goal was to have them understand that they get the chance to help other children and that their money doesn't always have to be spent on them. It can be spent on somebody else. And so we're really excited, and we know a lot of adults help as well. But with all of that said, they were helping to fill up. Our goal was that we would raise enough money through VBS offering to fill 10 bags. We actually raised enough money to fill 13 bags because the total brought in a week with these kids was $1,291. So that's really amazing. So as I've said to you before, between your generosity and now this offering, we're actually going to be able to buy more bags. So we're going to end up placing an order for some more bags that we can fill. And so we're just really excited. And actually some parents that were here actually reached out to Anthony as well at the end and said, hey, can we help your church with that? And so we said, yeah, get on our website, email us. We'll certainly get you in time. So people were really impressed to see what we were doing with our duffel bag project. So those are all good reports, and I just wanted to share all that with you and just remind you what the Lord did this week as we all worked hard and yeah, maybe at times wanted to pull our hair out, but you're saying, hey, praise God, it was all worth it, right? All right. Well, I have an assignment for you as we get into the Word today. I want you to get ready to testify. So some of today's sermon is you. And I'm going to give you some direction here for a few moments to think. But we've been asking for 6 months, and today is literally the 6-month anniversary. We started this at the 1st of January. We're 6 months into this series, asking this question every Sunday almost, what's your next step? Some of you filled out cards when we started this series saying, hey, I want to take these steps. So I want us to give glory to God. I want to be a little encouraged. I'm going to be a little selfish. I want to be encouraged to know that you're listening, that you've been listening to everything that's being taught by myself and Pastor Anthony and whoever, and you literally have been thinking about what's your next step. So at different points, because we're going to sort of do a little bit of review today before we get into new material and sort of look where we've been, I want you to be able to give some testimony. So Tim, have the mic ready, please. And I hope you're not going to leave me standing up here with nothing but crickets, you know what I mean? Or like white noise, right? You're going to actually jump up and say, yeah, I want to give praise to God. Here's what I've been doing in my life. Here's the next steps, right? Oh, wow, that was really not good response. All right, I'm trusting that I just caught you off guard. That's how we'll look at that. All right, so what we are going to be starting for the rest of the summer, so through July and August, is what I'm going to call time, talents, or time, treasure, and talents. And it's interesting to be talking about that. You probably have heard sermon titles or sermons that you might think, oh, I know where this is going. I've heard this before. And that's okay if you've heard it before. It's a good reminder. But we're going to approach all three of those things, hopefully from a slightly different perspective. But we're also going to approach them because there seems to be a lot of both confusion and misunderstanding about these three things as it relates to us as disciples. As disciples, all three of these areas become really, really important. What we do with our time, how we handle our time, what we do with treasure. And that's not just what's in your wallet. All right? Remember, at the beginning of this series, we started talking about that you have a treasure in an earthen vessel. This is the earthen vessel. The treasure is the truth of Jesus. And so it's not just money, though that we'll talk about that, but it's also what are you doing with what's been deposited in you. All right? And then finally, taking that a step further, as we talk about talents, we're going to spend probably the month of August, maybe part of July, we'll see how things flow out, talking really about spiritual gifts. We haven't done that in a long while. We've talked about the Spirit, but we haven't talked about spiritual gifts in quite a while. As a matter of fact, I was having a conversation with one of our young adults, and they were reminding me it's been almost 4 years since we've talked about it when I was leading the young adult group. So time goes really fast, and so we're going to be talking about spiritual gifts and what that means for us as a body and what it means for us as disciples. So hopefully we'll go at that all from a different perspective. But before we get to all that, we're going to talk about where we've been in sort of this 6-month anniversary, and I want to hear what God is doing in you. So let's talk about where we've been, and I'm going to do this rather quick. So again, get this testimony thing going, be ready to go. All right, so I'm not standing up here with silence a long time. But we started out obviously talking about just the call to become disciples. And I have to tell you, pastorally, if I have one goal, I don't know when my last day here is. I don't know when that day will be that I walk out the doors and I say, you know what, I'm ready to hand this church over to somebody else. I don't know when that day is. But here's what I do know. What I do know is if I haven't handed the next person disciples of Jesus, then I have spent all of this time failing. That's the truth. If I haven't handed them disciples, people who are following Jesus, who take that seriously, who are now discipling others, then I've failed them miserably and they're having to start all over again. And what a shame that would be to take a wonderful group of people like yourself and say, let's start all over again because we didn't really grow, we didn't really learn, we didn't really become more disciple-like in our walk with Christ. And so for me, pastorally, that primarily, without a doubt, is my first goal, is how do we make disciples? How do we create disciples? How do we cause people to walk deeply in their walk of faith? So that's a big thing. So we started out with all of that way back in January, 6 months ago. We talked about several things in that really quickly. We talked about the call to obedience, evangelism, selflessness, and transformation. And I'm not going to rehash all of those sermons today. They're all on the website. You can catch all of those. But the biggest thing in this is that word that's highlighted there or underlined is this idea that we should be being transformed. Always. From the moment that we say yes to Jesus and invite him in our lives should be being changed. That's a given. That's biblical. It's absolutely what this thing is about because we're changing from darkness. We just talked about it in VBS. 2 kingdoms. From a kingdom of darkness to a kingdom of light, we should be being transformed. If we cannot look back at if we walk with the Lord for a week, if we've walked with the Lord for 20 years, if we don't see that we have been transformed and continue to be transformed, then there's something missing in our lives. There's something not quite right in our lives. So that's huge. We talked about all that. And then we talked about the call to become disciples, which I sort of just introduced, but there's something with that call, and that is the sacrifice and the perseverance. All right? Listen, we do not live in a world right now where sacrifice is the name of the game. That is not the world we live in. Everyone, I don't care who they are, and unfortunately even Christians, are way too involved with what's best for them, what they want, what they need. Everybody else is in their way. If they're in our way in the wrong way, we'll sue them, we'll be angry at them, we might even shoot them. But this is not a world that cherishes, or at least not a culture in America that chooses sacrifice. So talk about 2 kingdoms. We're already talking about, oh wow, if I'm going to be a real disciple, then there's a reality that the person I'm following gave the ultimate sacrifice. What sacrifices do I need to make to follow him? And then certainly what we've been talking about a lot over the last couple of weeks is this idea of perseverance, and we'll pick that up here in a little bit later. All right? And lastly, in January, we talked about the call to make other disciples. And we have been being very intentional. Talking about my next step, both as a pastor and a person, I've been very intentional about how we've been doing things around here. We've changed our youth ministry. We've done all kinds of things to say we want to take this discipleship thing seriously. I've been really firming up some relationships and other things I have. And you know what? These things aren't always like this formal thing. But I know those people that God has laid on my heart, and I've said, I'm going to make sure that I watch after them. I'm going to make sure that I keep up with them. I'm going to make sure that I'm looking after them, whether they know it or not, because I understand that my whole process personally is about making disciples, let alone doing that from a bigger standpoint as a pastor. All right? So then we got into February, and we finally defined this thing. Well, what is a disciple? Because everybody's always sort of asking. So we sort of came up with this definition. We defined a disciple as one who is a follower of Christ, who desires to be faithful and trustworthy. We spent a lot of time talking about those 2 words in terms of being faithful and trustworthy. All right? That idea that I'm going to be faithful, I'm going to be someone that someone can count on, but I'm also trustworthy. They can trust me with these deep things. They can trust me. And God is that way. God is faithful to us, and he is trustworthy. And so we have a great example. So we're faithful and trustworthy to carry out the teachings of Christ and to live them out as their way of life. That's huge. You know, even the Bible says, Jesus says, not everyone who says to me in that day, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. So you know what? We have a job to entrust, and the Bible says, entrust these things to faithful people, to faithful men and women. Who are those men and women? The Bible says, know those among you, know their fruit. So who can we trust? I'm always looking both as a believer and as a pastor and saying, who can I trust with these deep things? Who can I trust to carry these things out? Who will be faithful to these kind of things? I'm always doing that because I take that very seriously that, you know what? The Bible says you don't take precious stuff and feed it to swine. You don't throw pearls before swine. You trust faithful people, good people. And so that's why I think sometimes people think, oh, I made the decision to Jesus, I went to church a couple of times, and I'm good. That's not a faithful and trustworthy person. All right? And so we've got to understand how that all works. And so a real disciple is someone who's proving themselves faithful and trustworthy. All right, number 3, we talked a lot about this, and we finally introduced our sort of our model, but taking responsibility for your walk with Christ. Listen, we live in a culture where we love passing the buck. All right? We pass the education of our children off to the school system. And I'm not against the school system. I'm just saying it trains us to pass that off. We even had a conversation as some of the VBS volunteers this week, and we're like, you know what? We send all of this information home. We send all of the lessons home. We send all kinds of stuff home to parents, and yet we know that maybe half of those parents will never open that bag with their child and actually have that conversation. It's discouraging to us because we're used to passing the buck. We even do that in our churches. Oh, it's on the pastor to teach us. It's on the pastor to train us. If he or she is not doing good, then that's not my fault, God. Oh, absolutely it is. How many times do I have to tell you, I have you for 2 hours on a Sunday. All right? The devil has you the rest of the time. What are you going to do about that? Which kingdom are you going to walk in? Because he, the Bible says, is loose on the planet. All right? So what are you doing with the rest of the time? Parents, what are you doing with your children? Because if you're just counting on Sunday school, it will never be enough. Ever. It has never been enough. But we have this thing about passing the buck. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what we have responsibility. And we gave you 4 things that we said you have responsibility in according to the Word. You have a responsibility to learn, to know the Word, to learn to walk in the Word. You have a responsibility to connect, to meet with other believers, to spend time with other Christians so that you can learn what they've gone through, what they are going through. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of that stuff. But how do we do that? You have a responsibility to serve. Certainly, we've talked a lot about that. And you have a responsibility then to disciple. So we took all of those things and we put them into this little graphic here that's going to pop up. Right there it is. And we said, this is sort of our way of thinking about discipleship. So we said, you know what? You begin. We had a wonderful testimony from Jason a couple weeks ago that he had given his heart to the Lord. So he began this process. And so in the process, even as he was giving his heart to the Lord, he was learning. So none of this just happens like clockwork. It sort of all flows together. That's why the arrows are there. Then you have this responsibility to connect. You connect in worship. You learn to connect to God in worship. You connect in relationship. You connect in common purpose. Okay, we got together last week in VBS in common purpose. And certainly you connect in disciplines. What are those disciplines that we need to have as a part of our lives? Then you serve. You serve in ministry and outreach and missions. There's all kinds of ways that you can serve. And then finally you're moving toward discipling others. So we sort of put this into a visual that you can see, but here's the downside. Oh, I hate downsides, but here's the downside of our visual is that we actually end up, go on to the next slide there, please. We sort of end up with this situation where people sort of stop. They gave their heart to the Lord. They might have even started to learn a little bit, and then they just do nothing. They take no further responsibility in the process. You know, let's pass it off on the pastor, and if I didn't like his sermon, I'll complain about it all week. You know, if I don't like this thing, that thing, whatever, we just stop. And so really, you know what, when Jesus says, hey, the narrow road, that narrow road is a serious thing because so many Christians never go any further. And so at that point, do we even call them Christians? I don't know, and I'm glad I don't have to figure that out. But when the command is to go and make disciples, and we haven't gotten the whole way through this cycle, I don't know what he's going to think about that. Because have we been faithful? Have we been trustworthy? See, we've made it way, way too easy for people to think that they're going to heaven. Oh, just pray the prayer and you're going to heaven. It really actually isn't that simple biblically. It really, really isn't. There is so much more to that process than that. And so this process of discipleship becomes really, really important. Are you all catching, being reminded of all this stuff, I hope? All right, so then we moved on from that, and now we're moving into the end of February, and we talked about this really important process. Discipleship is a highly relational process. It requires time, investment, modeling, mistakes, and successes. It's highly relational. All right? So look around you and say, what relationships do I have? And so who can I be investing in? You know, a lot of this, I said, people make a mistake because they think they have to have these really formal kind of agreements, you know. Well, you know, you're going to be my discipler, I'm going to be your disciplee. That might work for some. I'm not saying it's all terrible and bad, but I find that those things become really bondage-inducing. I find that they often don't work because if one or the other doesn't work, then now who is at fault for the commitment not working? Whereas if we keep it relational, so there's all kinds of people then that I'm in relationship with, and I'm like, you know what? Every opportunity I have, I'm going to pour into your life. I did that this morning with someone. You know what? We're going to tackle this together. I'm with you. I've got you. You can just do that through the relationships that you have. You know, I've said to some who are taking even with some of our young adults who are working with our young people and others, you know what? Sometimes it's just come along. I'm going to pick on Dave Hoover. I think this is going to work, so I hope I'm right. But we've been working to hook up one of our young men with a discipler, and he happens to want to do cars. And I said, Dave, man, you're going to be the perfect person. But you know what? You don't have to schedule all kinds of other things because you're already working on cars. Just have him over. Spend that time with him while you're working on your next project or your next car. You don't have to think, oh, I've got all new schedules and I've got all new time. Figure out what works in your life because it's relational. Take them grocery shopping. Take them to hang out and do yard work. You know, use that time to your benefit. Don't get all caught up in all of those kind of things. But so discipleship can be happening all over the place in all kinds of ways, and it doesn't always have to be this heavy, formal kind of thing. And I think that we make that, you know, sometimes we do that by a church thing. Oh, we're going to have a discipleship class. So that means when you get through this discipleship class, you're really there. It's sort of like membership class. You know what? We're going to put you through a membership class. And once you get through, you're a real member. Problem is, you never come back. You see what I mean? That's really not an effective way to make disciples. If you think about Jesus' model, he basically lived and worked and slept, in a sense, with these guys for 3 years. It's just relational. It's just relational. Y'all hear what I'm saying? All right. By that time, we got to March. And March was what we usually call a family month. We had a concentrated time. And so now we're talking about a different kind of subject, and we're talking about the fact that disciples recognize the value, the high value God places on all life. The high value God places on all life. And we talked about the value of life. That was our theme. And we also talked about the fact that true disciples walk in two things, grace and truth. Not one or the other, but and both. We need the truth, but we need grace. We need grace, but we need the truth. We need both. What has unfortunately been the way of the church is it's all easy grace and everybody just gets in and there's no other worries, or it's all truth and it's hard line and we're traditional and we're conservative and you can only do this and you can't do that, and then we have nothing because people are saying that's just a rule book and I don't want that. I really want a relationship, right? So we spent a lot of time talking about that it's two things that disciples need, truth and grace. And then we finally talked about this reality that true disciples do not see people as the world sees them. We don't see them as disposable, all right? We don't see them as disposable. In other words, that they're not needed. People are needed. It doesn't matter what, and forgive me if this is the wrong word in this moment. I don't have this in my notes, but if we say that they're somehow deficient, who gets to define deficient anyway? Who gets to define that? I don't even know. But someone out there defines it, and we all think we buy into it. But people aren't disposable just because they don't measure up to whatever we think the right standard or the right way of thinking or the right way of acting. People aren't disposable. They're also not discardable. You know what? Let me just tell you, I'm not a fisherman, but I've fished. I know a lot of fishermen, and my understanding is it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time to stand there and wait for those silly things to bite. And then you reel them in, and if you get a real fish, then you have to clean the thing, and that takes time. And then you have to cook the thing, and that takes time. And then you get to eat it. For most people, that's a whole day process. It's a long time. And so you know what? This idea that people are disposable simply because they're too much work. Can I ask you a question? What if Jesus thought we were disposable because we're so much work? I don't know about you, but I think I'm a lot of work to him. And I mean that seriously. I've been at this a long time, and I still say, God, why? He doesn't treat us as disposable, as too much work. So we have to think about that. And then lastly, we don't treat people as abusable. We talked about human trafficking and all those issues that people using other people for extreme, selfish, incredible evil purposes and how bad that is. So how disciples see people is really big. And then lastly, what we just finished over the last 2 months is this need to build infrastructure. How do we abide in Jesus as disciples? How do we remain? We looked at John, this idea of abide, and it said it like 10 or 12 times. Okay, so then we've got to do something. We've got to take responsibility and build infrastructure into our lives as disciples so that we can persevere, right? See how all this stuff has been coming together? So we've talked about 5 things. Let's see if you can even remember since they're the most recent. Give me one of the 5. Somebody yell it out. Oh, please don't leave me hanging. Come on, yell it out. No one knows. Everybody's silent. All right, starting to feel a little discouraged up here. Number 1, servanthood. Remember that call to serve way back in January where we spent several weeks talking about servanthood? How about this one? Meeting together. Connecting. Not giving up, meeting together. How about this one? Letting others speak into your life. Who are you listening to? All right? We spent time talking about knowing the Word and what that means, to building that discipline in your life. And then lastly, the last couple weeks, we've talked about prayer, about giving thanks in that prayer, and being alert. All of those tied to this reality of prayer. Now do you remember? Say yes. Okay, thank you. Praise God. All right, now I have given you a 6-month review in literally 20 minutes. So let's hear from you. Have you used any of this to say, you know what, I have moved further. I've been being transformed. I've been choosing other steps. So Tim's got the mic already. So let's see if anybody wants to get, or Brian, I guess, got the mic already. Good. Daryl, go.
I don't need the mic, but for the people at home.
Yeah.
Since we're reasonably new here, it's a different style church from what I'm used to. I'm used to a 20-minute sermon and you're out the door before
Right.
the potatoes get bad in the oven. I've learned a lot just from you and the way you preach and from the way the people in this congregation interact with each other.
Praise God.
I've known Jeff for years. We tried some other churches down here. And it takes a while to go from an hour to a 2-hour commitment on a
Yeah.
Sunday, which is,
Yep.
but we've enjoyed being here just because, and I'll speak for Deb.
Yeah.
We've started doing a devotion every day,
Wonderful.
starting our day and doing things just that way. We have discussions all the time about,
Yes, God.
we pull out of here, and we always talk about what you said, what we're challenged to, what we're,
Great.
and we try to talk about those differences in our daily lives. So and we just had a little conversation this morning. I've started to see some signs that say, the past is the past. You can't change that. You can only go forward. And until you get a concept of that, I've been church my entire life,
Right.
but it's a different thing. When you say you've got to, you can continue to go forward, but if you don't pick up the word or try to do that, just having Mom here with us makes us happy to be able to do that, and trying to work with the family. We were just at Knoebels with all the grandkids and everybody's church that was there, and it was more of a joyous occasion because of that.
Wonderful. That's great.
We had a
Yeah.
really nice time, but I feel very comfortable here, and I'd like to thank all of you for allowing us to come into the congregation
Praise God.
and try to become a part of it.
Praise
Even
God.
Mr. Miller
Thank you
over there.
guys very, very much. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. And Deb, even though you didn't say it, we're going to thank you too since he was speaking for you. So there you go. All right, who's next? Right over here, Miss Carolyn.
I feel like I'm growing because of what you've been saying this year. I wanted to disciple more, and some of the people that I've been trying to talk to now, I'm retired, but there's 2 women that I work with. I met with one this past week for breakfast. As far as I know, she's not a Christian, but she's a grandma raising her grandson. So
Very
she
common.
has a lot of issues and stuff, and I invited her to the church, and she said she might come sometime, and I'm going to just try to keep in touch with her. And then there's one that is a Christian, and she has struggles too and stuff, so I tried to talk into her life. Now, I didn't talk to her. I tried to text her, but she mustn't be a text person, so I'm going to have to call her and talk to her on the phone and see how she's doing and everything.
Yep.
And then there's one, he's like 28 years old, and just one night, Jim had men's group, and he likes the hot dog shop. Jim doesn't like the hot dog shop. I do. So I said, do you want to go to the hot dog shop with me for dinner that night? And he went along with me. At first, I thought he thought it was sort of weird. I said, don't be weirded out. I'm just like your grandma. But we had a good time and everything. And him, I think he would really be good in the sound room if he would just want to come to church. But I've approached him a couple times. He doesn't seem interested. But, I'll just be his friend, and
Yep.
maybe God will open the door. I keep trying to plant seeds and everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and also on my card, I said I love children, babies.
Yeah.
But this isn't a new thing. I do it every year, Tender Care Walk.
Yeah.
And since I'm retired, I signed up with Crystal to be in the nursery.
Yep.
And now I helped all week with Vacation Bible School, and I enjoyed that.
Good.
So, and I'm also trying to speak into Oliver's life
Yep.
when I get around him and everything.
Absolutely. Yep.
So that's some of the stuff I'm trying
That's
to do.
wonderful. Well, and I love, because one of the things that you brought up too is this idea that we think discipleship only happens after someone gets saved, but part of discipleship is leading them down a process to get saved so that then they can become true disciples of Jesus. So I love the fact that that's part of what you're doing. So that's perfect. That's wonderful. All right, good. Anybody else? Hopefully I have some more. I want to hear some more. Dan.
So, this might sound a little strange, I don't know, but, well, for my job, I travel.
Yep.
I spend a lot of time on the road, away from home, and I meet with customers. So I'm talking with people all day long. So But what's kind of interesting is, at the end of the day, you got to eat dinner, and I'm by myself most of the time. So usually, and this may sound a little strange, but like when I go into a restaurant, I usually like to go sit at the bar and have dinner rather than sit alone at a table. I think that looks a
Yeah.
little awkward, but and it's just amazing, again, me being a people person, you can strike up some pretty interesting conversations with people, sitting next to you at the
Yeah,
bar.
absolutely.
And, but, it's really led to some pretty incredible opportunities to disciple,
Good.
and I know generally one of the ways, well, you could probably start the conversation with small talk or whatever,
Right.
are you from around here? Blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. But ultimately, at some point, if the conversation moves on, then at some point in time, I ask it, if they're a Christian or if they go to church or whatever, and that's usually when, that's usually when the conversation either continues and gets a little more interesting or it's over.
Yeah, right. Right.
But when I get involved in that and we start talking about like being a Christian or denominational or whatever, and people will ask, generally they always ask you back, well, what about you? And I'm like, well, I'm a Christian. I said, but to be quite honest with you, with the negative connotation that comes with Christian
Right.
anymore, I said I've kind of taken a step away from that, and I tell them that I'm a follower of Christ.
That's great.
And
Yeah.
a lot of times, I know when you used that verse in a sermon a couple years ago, I took a picture of the slide that was on the thing, and I have that in my, camera roll or whatever,
Right.
and I'll bring it up and
Yeah.
I'll show them that, and you have it printed here
Yeah.
again. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But so that really opens, a door, and I use Right Now Media as a discipleship tool
That's good.
so much when I'm out on the road. I mean, I don't know if Anthony or who keeps track over here about invitations that go
Yeah.
out, but they probably are like, where does this invitation from Virginia or from Michigan or from New York, or who are these people,
Yeah.
And they're just people that I meet along the way, and it's like, listen, you really want a good tool and a good opportunity to learn more about Christ. Here's the way to do it. And
Good.
a lot of times, if it progresses far enough, I'll get like an email from them or something because you need it for
Right.
the invitation. And then I'll follow up with them and say, here's some series that I've
Yeah.
used, in Right Now Media. Check them out.
Yeah.
And just send them an email. And
Yeah.
most of the time, I never hear back from them
Sure.
again, and that's fine. But so that's kind of one of the things that, again, the Right Now Media and being able to discipleship and using follower of Christ, instead of necessarily Christian.
Good.
So then the second thing, I know that we were talking about the cards, but I had put on there about somehow ministering to the men of the community. And it's been a slow process, but I have a great, I think I have a good partner with Brian here. One of the things that I've done is early on, when they were talking about like the discipleship, and mentorship and stuff here, I was like, why can't adults do that for
That's right.
the young adults,
That's right.
And so I've kind of ponied up with Brian a little bit, and we've been spending time, definitely a lot more time engaged in conversation and doing some things.
Good. Awesome.
And then one of the other things I'm working on with somebody else in the congregation that is Anthony and I have been discussing more about how to reach men out in the community a little more as well. And I think we have a good plan. It's just a matter of finding time and getting it started.
Good.
But so hopefully that continues to work and come to fruition.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. Anybody else? And again, it doesn't have to just be what's on your card, but just are you taking that steps? Are you doing anything that's transforming you?
And just a follow-up to that, I mean, being on, like you said, that relationship we started, just the text messages of like, hey, how things are going with this or whatever, I'll give a testimony to that. That's been a great thing in my life for that end. So, yeah.
Good.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah. I'm
Hi,
new
Sarah.
here. But I've had a lot of changes recently in my life. I just came home from jail, and that was it's not my first time in jail, but it was going to be the last. And it was extremely traumatic what I went through in there in Franklin County. I think this is the biggest change in my life, and it's been because of God, giving testimony in jail to other inmates and trying to help them. Even if it was just looking through a cell at somebody that was in a smock that was going through it, that was on suicide watch, and I would just give praying hands to them and tell them up above, God is there for you. Literally just through a door motioning to them, and that kept them hanging on. That was the first thing I'd do when I'd wake up when we were doing standing head count. They'd look over me every morning after that, waiting for me to tell them, pray. It was like they were waiting for that. So that's what's keeping me hanging on. It's keeping my sobriety. To be honest, I went to an AA meeting already. It was not positive for me. They had left there wanting to get messed up, and that was not good. I come to church, and this has got me. This is keeping a hold on me. I'm opening up my Bible every single day. God's what does it for me.
Great.
It gives me hope. It gives me happiness. I can't sit around and talk about using drugs and alcohol prior. I can give a testimony about God and how he changed me with it from wanting to do it no more. But God is what's here for me, and it's what's keeping me strong and giving a testimony. I'm not going to, when I was on drugs and alcohol, when I was down there on Johnson Street in Hagerstown, I was buying drugs. I was handing out daily breads and trying to tell people, you don't have to do this for the rest of your life. I know you're on drugs and you're selling, but it's not. I'm not saying you got to change overnight, but God is here for you, and I give him a daily bread and buy him something to eat. And that's not the way to do it. I had to realize when I was in jail, you can't live two lives and expect to have different.
Yep.
You have to change fully. So even though I thought it was still helping when I was on drugs, it still wasn't fully enough. I have to be clean in order to get my life right and want to show those other people I'm trying to talk to.
Good job, Frank.
So I honestly, I'm here. I want to volunteer time. I need this. This is what I need, you guys. So if you guys have anything, you need help with, I mean anything, from washing cars to cleaning, anything, from going to an old people's home and talking to people, going to the jails and talking to people. I am all for it. Please, reach out to me, get my phone number.
Good.
Thank you,
Sarah,
guys.
thank you for joining us. Thank you for
I have
being
anxiety. Sorry,
Thank
I was
you
a little
for
hurt.
sharing. It's wonderful. That's great. Thank you.
Well, that was awesome. I feel like I shouldn't even say anything now.
That's great.
Yeah, I did. A couple things that I had on the card was about doing more discipleship. So I have hooked up with one of the young adults,
Yeah.
and we're committed to meeting every month and encouraging each other and sharing. And so that's a stretch for me.
Yeah.
I haven't done that before, so that's kind of a stretch. The other thing is that I just wanted to be more vocal about Jesus. And, somewhere along the line, I heard a message of a challenge of just a let's pray kind of challenge, and just a one-line prayer when someone has a need. And I've been implementing that, and it's been really good. It's been really good just to be able to say, hey, let's just pray. Heavenly Father, help this person.
Good.
In Jesus' name. It doesn't have to be glamorous or long or uncomfortable, but that's been a challenge for me as well. And so I just encourage that you are encouraging us and challenging us to step out and be more vocal about our faith and applying what we're learning on a day-to-day basis. So it's awesome.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, anyone else? We're not going to prolong it, but anybody else at all? This is
I think
Jason.
for me, like
Brian.
going off of the sermon series about listening to the Spirit, and then watching people like Kathy just speak, be like, hey, I got to say something. You know what I mean? Like, when you hear that voice, being like, not understanding why, just be like, it might take a little while. For me, recently, it took like a week or so to just be like, I don't know why I'd say this to this person. And then finally, one day, it was just like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, and I did. And it was just like, just a couple times of watching people do that and learning through that, and then understanding why, the Spirit speaking and what that voice truly is.
That's
I think
great,
for
Brian.
me, that's been something
Yeah.
I've worked through. So.
That's awesome. That's great. I think Jace had his hand up then.
Well, I guess like I did 2 weeks ago of announcing that I had gave my heart to the Lord. On Father's Day, I had the inspiration from the Lord to asked the question to my father, would you reconsider your father? And he didn't respond. And then I asked, did you not understand what I meant? And he said, talking about God. And I was like, yes. And he's like, I'm good. And I was like, all right. But before that, I had been inspired to try to reach out to him, and hopefully in the future he'll be able to build a deeper relationship with me, because we haven't really had that much of a good relationship. And then on another note, I have been more soft-hearted towards people that are for negative things, and not just attacking them like they would attack others, but just talking to them or just showing kindness to them. And I've even, since I've given my heart, I've even prayed over my wife, Allison, in her times of need. That's really been great to do, and yeah.
Good. Jace, that's wonderful. Thank you very, very much. That's awesome. I'm glad to see you continue to grow. That's exciting. Jason is one of the people that we're going to water baptize later this summer, along with Leary and along with his wife. And I love when we get to do families together. I think that's a great thing, sort of like Cornelius and his whole family. So if you want to be water baptized, let me know. All right, Steve, you're up.
Some of you may or may not know, I've been at this a long time, and not always successfully. Not always in the way that I would like to be. But I would have to say, in the probably 12 or 13 years that we've been part of this congregation, and under your leadership, we have been well fed. We have been challenged. We've had sore toes at times, but not maliciously, out of love and concern. I believe that one of my gifts that I've been given is to be a servant, to give, and I get more joy out of giving to those that are in need, those who have less than I do. I'd sooner do that than I would receive.
That's good.
And I'm amazed on the mission trips that I've been on, those who have so very, very little, what they are willing to share, what they are willing to give to the likes of me that have so much. I believe in my serving others. I have opportunities with those who have not had the same kind of life that I have, to be able to speak to them, to show them kindness and love and a forgiveness, if you would say that. But on behalf of you, speaking into my life, and you said that you have to pass things on to people that you trust. Probably 7, 8 months ago, you came to me and asked me if I would put my name on a ballot. Because you trusted that I could do the job, that I would be faithful. That was, to me, it was inspirational, but it was a load. it's a responsibility that is heavy. And I try to do my best. I'm not very good at balance and walking a tightrope. But with practice, I might be able to be somewhat reasonable.
Somewhat.
But we certainly appreciate the things that you've taught us, the love and grace that you've had for us. And this is family, whoever's here, whoever's at home, ones we see, we don't see, is all family. And I've known Daryl's wife, Deb, a lot longer than him, but you're welcome. And we enjoy having you here.
Amen.
And we enjoy your company.
Amen. Amen. Great. All right. Well, thank you for that this morning. I really, I certainly wanted to hear those testimonies. Oh, did we miss somebody? Somebody raising their hand? Who am I missing? Go ahead, buddy.
Thank you for helping my mom and my dad, and thank you to understand that I'll always love you in my heart, because Kayla is doing the same thing to me and to everybody, to Danny, to Kathy, Danny, and Kayla, and me. Thank you for helping me, Mom. Thank you for my mom, for helping her to do the best I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. All right. Well, as I said, it's great to hear all that God is doing. I know that God is doing more, and whenever a mic is passed around, half of you close up and don't say anything, but I'm thankful for when I hear those stories and know those things in private as well. But I want the congregation to understand that God is moving and God is doing, and that people really are taking next steps. There have been a lot of next steps for a number of you throughout this year, and I'm excited about that. All right, well, our time is ticking very, very quickly, and so we're just going to hint at and sort of set up where we're headed for the summer. So let's look at that together real quick in your notes. So I want to talk to you about time. Time is like, to Christians, is like money. Nobody wants to be told about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. Because there really are two things in life that we think are our own. The first one is our money, and the second one is our time. I think Daryl hit it so beautifully. I mean, let's face it. If you grew up in church, you were used to a 20-minute sermon to make everybody happy. You were in and out, and then we wonder why half of the people in our nation right now that Christianity is an all-time low, because you can't feed on that kind of diet and not make disciples and then say everybody should just now serve Jesus. It just doesn't work. All right? And so time is a big issue. So time and money are not the thing. So this is not an exciting sermon for me to give you, because we get really defensive about those two things. Who are you to tell me how to spend my time? But biblically, particularly as disciples, as followers, as Dan said, as followers of Christ, who prove ourselves faithful and trustworthy, we have to talk about how we spend our time. And really, a lot of what we've spent the last couple of months talking about in terms of building our infrastructure has to do with time. It all has to do with time. Disciplines have to do with time. So we're just going to sort of lay out in the next couple of minutes, just get us ready for where we're headed over the next couple of weeks. All right? So let me say this about time, because as Americans, we think about time very differently. So here's my first statement to sort of get us started this morning. Time is a concept that is different depending on where and when we live. Now, I want you to think about that. How we as Americans think about time is very different than how Europeans think about time. And if you've ever been on a mission trip to any of the southern countries with us, how they think about time, as a matter of fact, when we're on a mission trip, we will often say, oh, it's El Salvador time. Oh, it's a Dominican time. Because it's a whole different concept of time. Totally different concept of time. let alone the time in history when we live. Not everyone has thought about time the same way we think about time now. It has changed. There was a time they didn't even have a way to measure time. But we know from the Mayans and everything in history that they certainly worked to figure out how to measure time. They had to learn for crop growth and for all of those things, when to know seed time and harvest. Eventually, timepieces were created, so we learned how to sort of keep a time record. But even in our calendar, I don't know if you know this, but the reason we have a leap year is because time's a little wonky. So we have to add a day just to sort of balance out how all the sun and the moon and the stars move. Time is an interesting concept, but it is not a concept in any way, shape, or form that has been lost in the Bible. And there's a lot of information as we learn about being disciples and saying what's our next step that we have to think about time. So I've already sort of said this, but I'm going to clarify it. Time to Americans are really about two things. This is how we think about time. Number one is exactness. You said 8 o'clock. I mean, even in our churches now, we have countdowns. 5, 4, just to get we're about exactness, okay? And getting more done. Right? Am I right? That's how we think about time. That's how exactly we think about time. There may be some other elements, but those are the two big ones. Is someone on time? And again, that doesn't work just about anywhere else in the world, but it's how we think about it, and certainly getting more done. As a matter of fact, my wife will tell you that one of my great weaknesses is when she calls at the end of the day and she's on her way home, and I'm finishing up my day, we'll say, obviously, hey, how was your day? And I'll either say it was a good day because I got a lot done, or it was an okay day because I didn't get everything done on my checklist, right? Anybody else think that way besides me? Yeah. That's how we think about time. That doesn't make it biblical. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make everybody else wrong. It's just the way we think about time. But the problem is, as with many things in terms of sin and all that, we start to judge each other based on that. I've dealt with that when I've been on a mission trip. We're on the Dominican time. And then I get frustrated because we're waiting an hour. We could have been getting work done, but they waited an hour before they all showed up. You see what I'm saying? But yet they would work longer. So it's just, we have a really messed up kind of version of time. And so we have to be really, really careful. And as we think about being disciples then, we have to really work through this because I know Anthony and Caitlin and others, I've read it as well. There's a book out there by John Mark Comer called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. This idea that we're just doing so much and having so much, and how do we just take time back? How do we do that? We're watching our VBS kids and seeing them move up. I mean, little Wyatt and Piper moved from the nursery for the first time this year into one of our older classes, and you start to realize, as we do with our kids and our grandkids, oh my gosh, I'm getting older. Where's the time going? This concept of time is a hard thing for us to grasp, Christian and non-Christian. It's just a hard thing, and we have to understand what's cultural and what's biblical. That's why I say I think it's a really misunderstood kind of thing, because sometimes we think that godliness is next to busyness. That's an American concept. It's not a God concept. All right? And so we have to be able to differentiate. Does that make sense? So just sort of laying out a little bit. So in the Old Testament, how was time? And there's only one word in the Old Testament. It's literally a two-letter word, or it would have been two-symbol word. It's et, as we would pronounce it, all right, et, basically. But in the Old Testament, time is often about events and occasions. Events and occasions. So let's start in Genesis 1. All right? What was the events? How did they measure time? God created, but then what did God do in that creation? Day 1. Light and darkness. Events. That's how they measured time. The events took place at this time period. We don't actually know, was it on a physical day? Certainly, we could think that way, and it wouldn't necessarily be wrong. Was it not? Because we don't really have the measurement. The only measurement that we have in Genesis is the fact that, there's morning and evening, so we sort of look at that as sort of a lunar day. So is that literal? You can fight that all day long. I don't really care. But the reality is it was an event. And so each of those 7 days, they were event-filled. On this day, this event took place. Does that make sense? So a lot of things. And so all through the Old Testament, that's how they describe time. So when they got to festivals, oh, it's Passover. It's an event. That was a time thing that went on. So they looked at that as time. Even though we know it today is usually about a 30-day process, for them it was an event. They didn't think about it in terms of lunar days. They thought about it in terms of event. It's just Passover time. Does that make sense? So the Old Testament had a very different way that it thought about time. And so we see that in Ecclesiastes, and so we're going to end with that today. That's all the further we're going to get. So in Ecclesiastes, which should be a familiar passage to most of you, in chapter 3, verses 1 through 8, and it says this: "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven." That time is that 2-letter word, et, and it simply means there's an event for everything under heaven. That's all it means, okay? A time, so an event to be born. There's an event to die. A time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. And I got to get the rest of my notes so I have it. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Now, if you understand the original language, because we look at that as Americans, right? We're taking our understanding of time, which is what? 2 things I just said. What? Exactness and getting more done. So we look at that and apply that, and we start to put all kinds of parameters on that. That is not how the Hebrews saw that. That's not how the readers would have understood that. The other thing I want to point out is that Ecclesiastes is a part of the wisdom books. So wisdom by Solomon is being poured out here. All right, so there's wisdom in something that we need to understand. And so what I want you to understand that is often misunderstood is these are not about it begins and ends here. It's about an event. And that's totally different. And it's something that I believe as Christians we have very much lost. Because here's how we think about things. I'm going to take the case of a time to mourn. For us, we apply our American understanding, and we say this: oh, someone died. Oh, in a week we'll have a funeral service. After that, we're all done. Is that person done grieving? Is everyone done grieving? But that's how we act. That's how we live. We've set a time because we have to be exact. But what happens? People don't mourn properly anymore. People are carrying grief that they should never be carrying because we've not given them the event that's necessary. And what does an event mean? An event doesn't mean we have a party. An event means that we allow them to have a process to grieve. And we make way for that instead of saying it can only begin and end here. You understand? Biblically, that's how they would have understood that this would have been an event. So when there's an event to celebrate, it's not just we celebrate a wedding and we're done in 4 hours. There is a process of understanding that being married. And so one of the things that I do in counseling is I say to a young couple, I'm like, when you get, and anybody who's been married, I mean, you know this to be true, you know what? You take the next year. You have an event here that you need to spend time. I would rather you not be in ministry. I would rather you just take the time and focus on, there needs to be an event process to that, because that first year is so critical, right? Have I not said that to so many of you? Somebody help me. Didn't I say that to you? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I knew that I did. So those are really important things that we don't understand about time, especially biblical time. So we're talking about allowing things to have room to grow and move, and not this American exactness that needs to begin and end here. You know, I've had people say that sometimes I repeat things a lot, particularly when I'm celebrating. So I might say over and over, oh, Jason got saved, Jason got saved. And everybody's like, we all know. And I'm like, but are we done celebrating about that? Is that all it is one hand clap and that's all that we're good for? Really? Isn't that an event? Isn't that something to celebrate, that the kingdom of darkness lost someone and the kingdom of light gained somewhere? That's a big deal anymore, right? But we don't make it an event. We make it a moment, a good hand clap, and we think we're done, right? You see, so biblical time, at least in the Old Testament, was not about our understanding of American time. It was really about this event. Now, I'm going to end with that because our time's up, but just to sort of lay out, you can see how just even as disciples, just talking about time, we have to rethink this thing because we don't have it right. And honestly, in some of these things, we're just not giving people the space that they need to have the event that they need. It's not just mourning. What about just, like I said, celebrating? I love the idea. There's a time to dance, and there's a time not to dance. There's a time to embrace. You know what? Just think about that as an event. Not just, oh, I feel like I have to. But there's also a time not to embrace. We have to know, when is that event appropriate and when is it not appropriate? And maybe it's okay to just sit and hold somebody, but we're uncomfortable. But maybe that's what they need, is just to be held for a few moments. Do you see how we have to think about that just a little bit differently? And I realize we don't live in the Old Testament. We can say that's sort of cultural. But again, I want to remind you, this is part of the wisdom books. There's something wise about us getting some of this back because we've lost it. Y'all with me? So as we're going forward, we'll talk more about that because next time we're together next week, we'll talk more about what that looks like in the New Testament so we understand how it has changed. Because remember, I said it's not just where we live, but it's when we live. And by that time, they had learned to measure time better and different things. So how did that change? And so how does that affect us in the new covenant? And how does that affect us in terms of our discipleship and our lives? Helpful just to start thinking about that? All right? Because we're not handling time really well. All right? So that sort of sets up where we're headed for the summer as we talk about time, treasure, and talents. We're going to call it a day.